The Intergalactic High Council's diplomatic station looked like what would happen if a fever dream had sex with a kaleidoscope and their offspring was raised by committee. 17 different architectural styles clashed in spectacular fashion across its surface, Gothic spires jutted from Art Deco facades, while brutalist concrete somehow merged with what appeared to be crystalline origami. The station's designers, a collective of well-meaning but deeply confused alien architects, had tried to represent every major galactic civilization in one structure. The result was a monument to the principle that too many cooks don't just spoil the broth, they create an abomination that violates several laws of physics and at least 3 building codes. Ambassador Jake Monroe sipped his coffee from a titanium thermos and tried not to laugh as he watched a delegation of Crystallorians attempt to navigate a doorway clearly designed for beings with fewer than 12 limbs. The crystalline giants, each standing roughly 9 feet tall and resembling a disco ball having an existential crisis, clinked and chimed with every movement. Their leader, Ambassador Prism of Infinite Sorrows, had gotten wedged sideways in the entrance and was being pushed through by his subordinates like the world's most expensive conga line. "This is already the best diplomatic mission of my career," Captain Vera Patel muttered, adjusting her military dress uniform and checking her tablet. "And we haven't even gotten to the part where they try to threaten us with orbital bombardment." Ned, the junior intern who had somehow convinced the State Department that his degree in xenobiology qualified him for interstellar diplomacy, clutched his briefcase like a security blanket. "Are we sure this is a good idea? I mean, what if they actually follow through on their threats?" Jake patted the kid on the shoulder. "Ned, my boy, the key to successful diplomacy is remembering that everyone else in the galaxy is just as confused and terrified as we are. They're just better at hiding it behind fancy crystals and philosophical fog." As if summoned by his words, a delegation of fog-born drifted through the wall, literally through it, because corporeal barriers were apparently more of a suggestion to sentient vapor clouds. The lead fog-born, who went by the title of Whisper of Ancient Regrets, spoke in the traditional haiku format of their people. "Greetings, flesh-bound ones. Your species breeds far too fast. Please consider death, asterisk." "Well," Jake said, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast, "that's certainly direct. I appreciate the artistic flair." The third major delegation consisted of the bureaucrats of Glax, 8 tentacled jellyfish creatures who floated in mechanical life support suits and had apparently never met a form they didn't want to fill out in triplicate. Their representative, Assistant Deputy Subcommissioner Tentacle, Writhe, Form 27B, was frantically shuffling through a stack of papers that seemed to grow larger as he handled them. "Before we begin," Tentacle Writhe announced in a voice that sounded like a depressed accountant gargling salt water, "I need everyone to sign Forms 4-847-C through 9-992-F, acknowledging that you acknowledge the acknowledgement forms for acknowledging this meeting's acknowledgement requirements." "I'm going to need more coffee," Vera whispered. The meeting convened in what the architects had optimistically called the Grand Harmony Chamber, a space that looked like the inside of a Nautilus shell designed by someone who had only heard shells described secondhand by a drunk mathematician. Representatives from 47 different species arranged themselves around a central speaking platform, creating a tableau that resembled a very expensive and poorly organized zoo. Ambassador Prism of Infinite Sorrows finally managed to untangle himself from the doorway and took center stage, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into rainbow patterns that gave everyone mild headaches. "Humans of the Sol System," he began, his voice resonating like a tuning fork dropped in a cathedral, "we have gathered here today to address your species' reckless and exponential expansion across our galaxy. In the past century, you have established colonies on over 300 worlds, consumed resources at an unprecedented rate, and, most disturbingly, introduced the concept of Casual Friday to 17 different civilizations." Murmurs of horror rippled through the assembled delegates. Somewhere in the back, a representative of the rigid hierarchy beetle people was heard to whisper, "Not the Casual Friday, anything but that." Prism continued, warming to his theme. "Therefore, the Intergalactic High Council demands the following. First, humanity must surrender all colonies established in the past 50 years. Second, you must implement immediate population controls, capping your species at its current number. Third, you must cease all technological development that might threaten established galactic order. And fourth, he paused for dramatic effect, you must abandon the wearing of pants. The chamber fell silent. Even the Fogborn stopped their constant low-level whispering. Ned's briefcase slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers. "I'm sorry," Jake said, standing slowly and adjusting his tie. "Could you repeat that last one?" "Pants," Prism of Infinite Sorrows declared with the solemnity of a funeral director, "are a destabilizing influence on galactic fashion. The textile workers of Vega 7 have filed 17 formal complaints about human trouser designs undermining their traditional loincloth industry." Jake looked at Vera. Vera looked at Ned. Ned looked like he wanted to hide under the table. "Well," Jake said finally, "that's certainly comprehensive. I particularly appreciate the attention to detail regarding our legwear choices. However, I'm afraid we'll have to decline." The chamber erupted in shocked chittering, crystalline chiming, and bureaucratic paper shuffling. Whisper of Ancient Regrets composed an impromptu haiku. Humans refuse terms. Like stubborn rocks in swift stream. This brings great sadness, asterisk. Decline. Prism of Infinite Sorrows vibrated with indignation, sending light patterns cascading across the walls. You cannot simply decline. We are offering you the opportunity to remain a minor galactic civilization under our benevolent oversight. Jake finished his coffee and screwed the cap back onto his thermos with deliberate care. "See, that's where you've made a fundamental error in your calculations. You've assumed we want to remain part of your little galactic community." He gestured broadly at the assembled delegates. "Looking around this room, I have to ask, what exactly are you offering us that we can't do better ourselves?" Assistant Deputy Subcommissioner Tentacle Writhe began frantically flipping through forms. "I believe I have a standard response to diplomatic rejection somewhere in subsection. No, wait, that's for planetary annexation, perhaps under maritime law." "The thing is," Vera said, standing and straightening her uniform, "you've been operating under the assumption that humanity needs the galaxy. But looking at your technology, your social structures, your creative architectural choices." She gestured at the chamber around them. "I'm starting to think it might be the other way around." Ned, inspired by his superior's confidence and possibly suffering from oxygen deprivation due to panic, suddenly stood up. His voice cracked slightly as he addressed the assembly. "Also, and I cannot stress this enough, we are absolutely not giving up pants. Pants are awesome. Pants have pockets. Pockets are humanity's greatest achievement, and we will die on this hill." The unexpected eloquence of this declaration seemed to break something in the chamber's atmosphere. Several smaller delegates began crying, or at least emitting the species-appropriate equivalent of tears. A representative of the empathic slug collective dissolved into a puddle of emotional distress. Jake picked up his briefcase and nodded to his companions. "Well, this has been illuminating. We'll be heading home now. If you want to chat about trade agreements or cultural exchanges like civilized beings, you know where to find us. If you want to play Empire and make demands, we'll see you around. Or rather, we won't." As the human delegation walked toward the exit, Prism of Infinite Sorrows called after them, "You cannot simply leave. There will be consequences. Economic sanctions. Communication blockades. We will cut you off from galactic civilization entirely." Jake paused at the doorway and looked back. "Promise?" 1 year later, the Intergalactic High Council reconvened in emergency session. The same ridiculous chamber hosted the same ridiculous delegates, but the atmosphere had changed considerably. Where once there had been confident superiority, now there was a pervasive sense of unease that even the Fogborn's haikus couldn't adequately capture. "Status report," Prism of Infinite Sorrows demanded, though his crystalline structure seemed dimmer than before. Assistant Deputy Subcommissioner Tentacle Writhe consulted a stack of papers that had somehow grown even larger. "The blockade has been comprehensive. All trade routes to human space have been sealed. Communication arrays have been redirected. We have successfully cut humanity off from all galactic commerce and contact. And their response? That's the problem. They haven't responded. At all. Complete radio silence for the past 8 months. Our long-range sensors detect no transmissions from human space whatsoever. A representative of the Paranoid Octopi Confederation, a species that had evolved assuming everything was trying to eat them, raised a tentacle. Perhaps they have all died. Starvation. Technological collapse. Existential despair at being separated from our glorious civilization. Our reconnaissance drones suggest otherwise, Tentacle Writhe continued nervously. Human colonies appear to be thriving. Construction projects have increased. Agricultural output is up 300%. And they appear to have developed some form of communication system we cannot detect or intercept. Whisper of ancient regrets spoke. Silent human worlds. Like closed flowers in winter. What grows in darkness? Asterisk. The answer came from an unlikely source. Splort the adequately informed, a representative of the Information Merchant Guild, had spent considerable resources attempting to gather intelligence on humanity's activities. My sources, Splort began, his voice carrying the weight of expensive secrets, suggest that humanity has not merely survived our blockade. They have used it as an opportunity to innovate. Innovate how? Prism demanded. They appear to have developed faster-than-light communication that doesn't rely on the galactic network. Quantum entanglement paired with something they call spite-driven engineering. Their agricultural worlds are producing crops we've never seen. Their industrial capacity has tripled. And most disturbing of all. Splort paused dramatically, they appear to be having fun. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of bureaucratic papers rustling in what might have been a mechanical expression of anxiety. There's more, Splort continued. 3 months ago, the hedonistic pleasure seekers of Tau Ceti attempted to purchase what humans call coffee. They offered the annual GDP of a mid-level star system. The humans' response was to send them a recipe and instructions to figure it out yourselves. Several delegates gasped. The concept of refusing profit was apparently more alien to them than humanity itself. And last week, Splort's voice dropped to a whisper, the Zephyrian Empire sent a battle fleet to intimidate a human agricultural colony. 37 ships. They haven't been seen since. What happened to them? The Paranoid Octopi representative asked, all 8 tentacles quivering with fear. According to the last transmission, they encountered what the humans described as Grandma Chen's pocket dimension. Apparently, she was tired of people messing with her tomatoes and decided to show these kids what for. The third emergency session of the Intergalactic High Council convened 6 months later, though several species had stopped attending altogether. The Crystallorians had lost much of their luster, literally, their forms had grown cloudy with stress. The bureaucrats of Glax had generated so many forms related to the human problem, that they'd had to construct additional storage facilities. The situation, Prism of Infinite Sorrows announced to the diminished assembly, has become untenable. Assistant Deputy Subcommissioner Tentacle Writhe had been promoted twice due to his colleagues suffering nervous breakdowns, and now went by the title of Chief Coordinator of increasingly worrying human-related phenomena. His reports had grown both longer and more disturbing. Latest intelligence suggests that humanity has now achieved technological parity with, or possibly superiority to, the most advanced galactic civilizations. They have developed new forms of art that cause existential awakening in species that encounter them. Their children are solving mathematical theorems that our greatest minds have struggled with for centuries. And they have somehow trained their household pets to perform basic starship maintenance. That's impossible, protested a representative of the Logical Consistency Coalition. No species develops that quickly without external guidance and resource sharing. That's what we thought, Chief Coordinator Tentacle Writhe agreed miserably. But apparently, humanity views our blockade as what they call a feature, not a bug. Their innovation rate has increased exponentially since we cut them off from what they refer to as galactic bureaucratic bullshit. Whisper of ancient regrets offered a haiku. Caged bird sings louder. Isolated human soar. We are the small ones, asterisk. The meeting was interrupted by an emergency communication from the Galactic Trade Consortium. Their representative, a crystalline entity that communicated through color changes, flickered frantically between hues of panic. The humans, it managed to convey, are offering trade agreements. That's good news, isn't it? Asked Prism hopefully. No. No, it is not. They're offering to trade with us. They're not asking for anything from us. They want to give us technology, cultural exchanges, and luxury goods. In exchange for nothing. The chamber erupted in confused chittering. The concept of free trade, literally free, was breaking several species' fundamental understanding of economics. There's more, the Trade Consortium representative continued. They've left packages at the edges of our territory. Care packages. Food, entertainment media, and instructional materials for improving our civilizations. The note attached said, "Hope you're all doing well. Call us if you want to chat. Zoxo, Humanity." Chief Coordinator Tentacle Writhe consulted his papers with increasing desperation. I have a form for hostile takeovers, another for diplomatic negotiations, several for trade disputes, but nothing for benevolent gift-giving with emoticons. The final meeting of the Intergalactic High Council regarding the human question was held 2 years after the original ultimatum. Only 12 species attended, and most of them seemed to be there out of morbid curiosity rather than any hope of resolving the situation. Prism of Infinite Sorrows had lost most of his luminescence and now resembled a sad disco ball at the end of a particularly unsuccessful party. It appears, he said with the tone of someone announcing their own funeral, that we may have miscalculated. The understatement hung in the air like a particularly aromatic fart. Human colonies now span half the galaxy, reported the newly promoted Supreme Coordinator of Utterly Bewildering Human-Related Developments, formerly known as Tentacle Writhe. They've established peaceful contact with over 600 species, most of whom we'd never even heard of. They've solved the energy crisis on Proxima 7, taught the warrior poets of Betelgeuse how to knit, and somehow convinced the nihilistic death cultists of Vega to take up gardening. How? Asked a representative of the utterly confused fish people. Apparently, they introduced them to the concept of growing your own food with attitude. The death cultists now cultivate what they call vegetables of vengeance and have never been happier. A small voice piped up from the back of the chamber. What if we just asked to be friends? The suggestion came from Tiny Squeaks of Infinite Curiosity, the youngest member of the Timid Mouse Beings delegation. The idea was so radical, so completely outside the established parameters of galactic diplomacy, that it caused 3 species to faint and 1 to spontaneously molt. Friends. Prism repeated the word as if it were spoken in an alien language. Which, given the circumstances, it might as well have been. It's just. Tiny Squeaks continued nervously, they seem really nice. And they make excellent cookies. The recipe they shared has revolutionized our planetary economy. Epilogue, a bedtime story. Deep in the crystalline caverns of Prism 7, a young crystallorian child named Sparkle of Innocent Questions settled down for the night as her parent began the traditional bedtime story. Tell me about the humans, Crystal of Maternal Wisdom, the child asked, her faceted surface gleaming with curiosity. Long ago, the parent began, the great powers of the galaxy thought they were very wise. They looked at a small blue world and saw a young species that needed guidance. We will teach them their place, they said. We will show them how the galaxy works. What happened then? The humans listened politely, said, thank you, but no thank you, and went home. The great powers decided to punish them by taking away all their toys and refusing to play with them anymore. That sounds mean. It was. But the humans didn't cry or beg to come back. Instead, they built better toys. Much better toys. Toys that could do things the great powers had never imagined. And then, because humans are strange and wonderful creatures, they offered to share their new toys with everyone, even the ones who had been mean to them. What did the great powers do? Crystal of maternal wisdom's light dimmed with something that might have been embarrassment. They realized they had made a terrible mistake. They had tried to cage stars and wondered why the universe grew brighter. Are the humans still out there? Oh yes, little one. They're still out there, still building impossible things and sharing them with anyone who asks nicely. They taught us that the best way to make friends is not to demand respect, but to earn it by being kind. Will I meet a human someday? Perhaps. If you're very good, and very polite, and promise never to tell them they can't wear pants. The young Crystallorian settled into sleep, dreaming of coffee and cookies and the strange bipedal creatures who had accidentally conquered the galaxy through the radical act of being decent to each other. Somewhere in the void between stars, Ambassador Jake Monroe sipped his morning coffee aboard the diplomatic vessel Polite Disagreement and smiled as he read the latest batch of friendship requests from former members of the Intergalactic. Vera, he called to his old partner, now Admiral of the Human Friendship Fleet, looks like the Crystallorians want to learn how to make pancakes. Tell them we'll send a recipe, she called back from the bridge, where she was composing memes for the Galactic Cultural Exchange Network. But they have to provide their own maple syrup. We're not running a charity here. Ned, now ambassador of snack diplomacy, looked up from his latest report on the successful integration of human comfort food into 17 different civilizations. Should I add pancakes to the list of dangerous human technologies that promote universal happiness? Absolutely, Jake agreed. Right between hot chocolate and the concept of weekends. Outside the viewport, the galaxy spun on, a little bit brighter and considerably more confusing than it had been before a species of caffeinated bipeds had politely declined to know their place and instead invented a better one.